SKOR North on AM 1500 KSTP St. Paul, Minneapolis, 94.5 KSTP FM St. Paul HD2, and on SKORNorth.com. TCL is a proud sponsor of the SKOR North Studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. It's Purple Daily.
All right, welcome into Purple Daily. Matthew Coller here with you, along with Courtney Cronin of ESPN. How are you, Courtney?
I'm good. How's it going? Feels like it's been a minute.
It does, yeah. Andrew Kramer.
The off-season goes quickly.
Hey, let me ask you, as we get started here, lots of things to talk about. Antonio Brown, it appears, has officially requested a trade, or maybe been traded. It's kind of hard to tell from his tweet exactly what he's getting at, other than he's not going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler next year. So I wanted to go through with you some potential cap casualty wide receivers that go beyond the just the list of free agents that you can find on the interwebs. So free agents that could be coming. But last week, when Andrew Kramer was filling your shoes, we talked about the idea of Riley Reiff moving to guard. Mm-hmm. Andrew reported that the Vikings will consider moving Riley Reiff to guard. How do you feel about that?
I don't know in terms of how much you pay a guy like that and a possible restructure. We just don't have. I've been thinking about this for a while since I saw Andrew's story last week. We don't have a great sample size for it working out. Why do NFL teams keep thinking that this is the solution to fixing your problems along the offensive line? If you move him inside to guard, who's your left tackle? You're going to go out and sign somebody? Do you have the space for that? Because you're not going to, I don't think you're going to keep Riley Reiff at what he's making right now and scheduled to make in 2019 to move him inside to play guard. But then again, what kind of leverage do you have in order to do that? Because you're kind of SOL without a left tackle right now. And that's, either way, you're not in a good position.
So let me give you a few options and you tell me which one you like. Okay. Option A would be Riley Reiff stays at left tackle and they sign a guard, whoever it might be. Let's say it's not the top guard, but they sign someone else like a Quentin Spain or AJ Cann, just a guy basically who's a starting caliber left guard. Move Riley Reiff to left guard and draft with the 18th overall pick a starting left tackle. Move Brian O'Neill to left tackle would be another option there. But just say draft one, fill it that way. That's option number 2. Option number 3 would be sign Donovan Smith, who is or Trent Brown. So those are your 3 options. And then 2 of them have Riley Reiff moving inside. Sign one of the top 2 tackles in the free agent market, draft one, and move Reiff inside, or just leave him. Which one do you like?
I say leave him. First off, and we've talked about this before, about getting somebody who's ready to start at left tackle right away, right after you draft him. I don't think it happens. I think that the better chance and probably the better bet, if you're hedging on that, is that they're going to draft a tackle. If they do draft a tackle at 18, because right now every mock I'm seeing has them getting an edge rusher early on, which I think is, to a bigger point of, what you're doing with your defense and what that investment should be. And it should be on your front 7 and your pass rushers and all that.
Defense
they do. But in terms, I just don't know. We saw the experiment, and I do think that Riley Reiff is a better athlete. If we're looking at the tackles, I think he's a better athlete than Mike Remmers. I don't think the Mike Remmers experiment really worked out well, because you're taking an average athlete at best and moving him inside and asking him to play a position he never played before. And you wonder why the results were the way they were. It wasn't the right fit. Do I think that Riley Reiff has the athleticism to play guard? Maybe. I don't know. Has he ever played guard before? He made the switch from right tackle to left tackle in Detroit and then back to left tackle here. He has the experience of that spot, and I'm comfortable with him there. I don't know if, the sample size that we've seen it working out, not so much. That to me is maybe not the best option, because I just don't know in terms of what you're doing with your cap space. And you pulled up that list from Over the Cap of, potential cuts that we could be seeing at the tackle position. Do you really have the type of money to be going out and paying these guys when you have so many other needs? I don't know.
And I think the last time Riley Reiff played guard was, I think he was at Iowa.
Yes.
Like his junior year at Iowa.
That was 9 years ago?
Roughly, yeah.
And
I'm sure it will translate. It'll come right back to him, just like riding a bike.
And the experiment moving him to right tackle didn't work out particularly well,
Right.
which is one of the reasons that Detroit decided not to pay
Exactly.
him and move on from him. And they saw the shortcomings in his game at left tackle, and that was the reason that they drafted Taylor Decker to take over for Riley Reiff at left tackle. And we have seen those two, especially when it comes to pass protection. And now you have a quarterback who holds on to the ball, doesn't get rid of it quickly, and has exposed his backside, especially in a division with Khalil Mack in it. And it's not an ideal situation, but to speak to the option of potentially drafting one to start, if you look at the tackles who were taken in the first round last year, you have one guy who started and was reasonably decent in Mike McGlinchey. Then you have Colton Miller, who was a disaster, and Isaiah Wynn, who got hurt. And those are your three tackles. So the point just being, yeah, the guy might be able to come in and start, or he might not. It's very hard to predict how a draft pick is going to be able to step in right away. So if that's your plan, you are really rolling the dice there and taking a big risk by putting a starter as a rookie in at left tackle.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, with McGlinchey, did he start at left tackle? No, he started at right tackle.
And then they moved
And
him?
then they moved.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Did
But
they move him to left tackle?
They had Joe Staley there, so I would assume that. I mean, starting at left tackle is a.
Well, maybe he played right tackle the whole season.
Maybe
I've got it backwards.
Yeah, I mean, but to me, still, you're looking at a situation where that takes time to develop. You don't bring somebody in to start at left tackle. Left tackles, what are the three positions people talk about? Your number one investment should be defensive end, quarterback, and left tackle. I mean, obviously not in that order, but that's what you're spending your money on. And so I don't think that with that type of investment, you're necessarily looking at any of these draft prospects, no matter who's going in the top 10, top 20, where they're projected, and thinking that they're going to come in here and be able to fix the flaws that Kirk Cousins does have. And expect that this is going to be any better of an experiment by, piecemealing your offensive line together.
And McGlinchey, I just looked up his Pro Football Focus numbers. He was pretty good. He was 23rd by Pro Football Focus of guys who were regulars. So it's 23rd out of 61. So he was a top half of the league tackle, but he was also the 9th overall pick. Yeah. And if you assume that the NFL people usually get it right, which they do, I mean, the guys who are drafted higher are worth more. Just across the board in all drafts in all sports, that if you're at 18, that's going to be a lot harder to get a guy who can step right in. So then you start looking around at other options, and it's pretty hard to make an argument that many of them are better than just having Riley Reiff at left tackle and trying to fill that spot with a guard. Because the point that you made about the potential cuts, guys who might be let go, I mean, none of these players are very attractive. DJ Humphries from the Cardinals, he's a disaster. Jeremy Parnell might be sort of kind of okay. A very, very old Jason Peters, who looked like he still had it last year, but then, Jason Fitzgerald of Over the Cap writes that that's kind of a 50-50 shot that even happens, that they cut him. So, the options are not many when it comes to this situation. And I think what they should do with the draft pick is either first or second round, you take another tackle without the assumption that the guy's going to start. Because anytime you start thinking, we're going to draft for a guy to start this year, unless it's in the top 10, I think that's where you get yourself in trouble. And maybe the Vikings even did with Laquan Treadwell.
Even historically, taking a look back at this past draft class, who were the best tackles and guards? The ones, as you said, drafted in the top 10. You think about Mike McGlinchey, you think about Quentin Nelson, you think about, the players that, went high, and they went high for a reason. Yes, there was a run on guards. Yes, there was a run on offensive linemen. And I think I saw somewhere, someone said yesterday that they expect double digits taken potentially in the first two rounds, which I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Yeah. There are tackles.
We know how important those positions are. But if you're not getting them kind of like with the really premium, the lottery spots, if you want to call them, I just don't think that's going to work. And, to one point on Riley Reiff, I mean, they made the mistake before. I mean, which is why, do we know if Mike Remmers is going to be on the roster and, once free agency hits, do they really want to pay $6.3 million for a guard?
Do you think that he would restructure and stick around as like a swing player?
I don't know. I mean, I think that he's still, I think he's a serviceable to good right tackle. I think that he has a future with that, several more years with it. I don't think guard is going to be his best fit going forward. Mm-hmm. So If they can find a better guard and upgrade that spot on the interior, I think that he is very much a potential candidate for a cut. But why would he want to restructure? That's my thing, is like with the leverage thing, when he knows he can start, he's been a starter before. Why would you want to restructure?
Yeah, no, that's a good
and
point.
Riley Reef has an $11.7 million cap hit. You don't want that at guard. I mean, you got to unload that somewhere. And I don't think they have the leverage to tell him, we need to restructure you and we're going to move. Oh, by the way, we're going to also move you inside. You're going to be playing left guard, taking over for Tom Compton. And you think about the long-term health of this offensive line. What did we talk about? Was it 2 weeks ago? That putting somebody in between Riley Reef and Pat Elflein, a veteran guard presence, is going to make both of them better. Yes. And I don't think that this is going to be your long-term solution. Oh, we need to get him through the 2019, get Kirk through the 2019 season. Let's figure out if this combination works. What are you doing to the overall health of your offensive line? What are you doing to the growth of a soon-to-be third-year player in Pat Elflein, who needs that? This is a critical year for him, I say.
Definitely.
Coming off the injury, knowing that he's going to be fully healthy, we assume, going into 2019. This has got to be one of the biggest years and jumps in his development, and I don't think that you get that by one-year option type things.
I think that what we come back to after talking this through, where Riley Reef sits and Remmers and where everyone's going to end up, is it's still going to be a patchwork offensive line.
Yeah, absolutely.
In 2019.
This could take 2 years to figure it out to where you have a gelled starting five. I mean, even last year in 2 years ago in 2017, that was five players playing in all new positions. I mean, and you saw how well that worked once they were able to figure it out, but how short-lived that was.
That's right. Yeah. And it sort of faded as the season went along and a couple of people got dinged
injured.
Up. Yeah. They were, playing with fire there to begin with, starting with a bunch of guys that were out of position. And I just don't like the idea of someone having to go from being a left tackle for so long in their career, all but 1 year, to moving to a completely new position. And I have heard people say, including Mike Zimmer, well, we just want the best five out there. Well, that hurt you in the playoffs when they tried to put Mike Remmers over at left guard after he had played right tackle the whole season and then one game at right guard, messing around with these guys. I mean, I saw some former offensive linemen discussing this with Donald Penn and moving him to the other
right
side.
Tackle, yeah.
Because of Colton Miller. And a lot of them were saying, like, this is a really, really hard thing to do unless you're one of those swing guys like Jeremiah Searles, who's only in the league because he could play all the positions. But if you're not that type of guy who trains at all the different positions, just snapping your fingers and saying, well, just move into left guard, I don't think that that's a very good idea.
It's moving positions to begin with. I mean, moving sides is incredibly difficult. And you brought up Donald Penn. Gabe Jackson was a left guard at Mississippi State. He was on that Raiders offensive line, the one that was so good the year. Like, it was basically them in Dallas, 1A and 1B. And I remember talking to him just about that transition. He said it took 3 years to figure out how you backpedal, your hands, your hips, moving your body on a completely different direction. It's like you have to retrain your brain on how to do it. And now you're asking him to learn to play an entirely different position. I think it's too much.
Yeah. And he would have to do it pretty much on the fly because it sounded to me that it isn't the decision that has been made yet. And
Correct.
Even last year when we were in OTAs, Remmers started out the first week of OTAs at right tackle. And so it wasn't decided yet. And it's just, to me, it's walking a tightrope with the offensive line, where the smarter way to do it seems to be, and we get this from Dallas, we get this from Indianapolis last year, you have to just draft them and develop them. And there's no cheap and easy way to fix it. It's the Vikings spent a lot of their draft picks on the defensive side, and a lot of them have worked out. But they neglected the offensive line, and they thought, oh, we'll just draft Willie Beavers. We'll just draft TJ
all these,
Clemmings.
Fourth and fifth round guys that very rarely pan out.
Yes, and then a lack of continuity with offensive line coach. Some of that not their fault, obviously, but still, it seems to me with a team like New England, their offensive line coach, and the fact that they drafted and developed those guys underneath the same offensive line coach, that continuity benefits them. And when you watch the Patriots run schemes, they can do anything. They run all sorts of different run schemes. And that's what Zimmer wants to be. But that's going to be difficult unless you can put guys in their right spots and leave them there and develop them there. And I was thinking about even this. because we're going to talk about Kyler Murray and the Vikings and whether that makes any sense. But if they drafted in the first 2 rounds a tackle and a guard in the first and the second, I think that Vikings fans would jump for joy if they did that.
Well, I wrote something recently, just like a bold off-season prediction, throw them all in the hat. And it was what we've talked about before. The only one that really makes sense to me is if you can build up draft capital to completely rebuild your offensive line. And where does that come from? Does it come from trading, potentially using Xavier Rhodes as trade bait to be able to get more draft picks? Because I don't think you're going player for player. It just doesn't happen like that. But, then could you potentially trade up even further into the first round? I mean, what do you really expect at 18 that's going to all of a sudden be this magical fix? I mean, I don't think unless you're getting somebody in the top 10 that it's going to be a right away improvement that you're going to be able to tangibly feel and see early on in the season. I just don't.
And so I pulled up the offensive linemen from last year, the rookies, who played more than 600 snaps. All right. Only 3 of them were graded by Pro Football Focus to be above average, and 2 of them were the top 2 picks, Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey. The other one was Braden Smith of Indianapolis.
Even Will Hernandez, who everybody, including yourself, was punching your fist on the table about. Look at where he graded out in the 2018 season. I mean,
he was 4th of the rookie linemen.
Exactly, but I mean, like in big picture wise, I mean. It's like the same argument that we have about Brian O'Neill of like, oh, look how great he did. I mean, he was a bright spot along the offensive line. Well, look at the numbers. Look at like where he stands among the rest of the league, among rookies, and then the rest of the league. I think we look at it too much in a vacuum and think that there's going to be this immediate fix where there's so many things that are kind of floating around here. And until we get into that free agency period where they're either releasing, they can release guys now if they want to, but when they're, restructuring, releasing, and we start seeing things move, I don't know if we're going to really be able to tell what's going to work.
So Will Hernandez still allowed 13 fewer pressures than Mike Remmers at guard with a statue of a quarterback in Eli Manning. But if they had drafted, and this is the thing, I like Mike Hughes and I like where he fits in, and they might need him if Xavier Rhodes continues to go off the other side of the hill. But if you had Will Hernandez now and Brian O'Neill as well, if they had drafted 2 offensive linemen then, and Elflein, assuming he is better next year, which I think is a safe assumption, then you would be looking at it saying you have 3 offensive linemen who are young and growing together with the same team on this same offensive line. Now you can patchwork these other parts of it or keep Riley Reif there, but you're in better shape as you go forward. Now, having so many positions open, you're just scrambling to fill them.
To me, it sounds like desperation.
Yeah.
A move like that screams, they know they're in win now. They know that their window is closing and it's shrinking by the day. But that's too desperate of a move to me because it just seems like you're, in a way, like robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yep. And I just don't think that that's the right way to do this if you're trying to really, I mean, if you want to say you're doing this to piecework something together and that Kirk is not your quarterback of the future and that you're just trying to get through the next 2 to 3 years, okay, you can admit that. But if you're trying to do something for the long-term health of this franchise, I don't think in long term, I'm talking about beyond 2 years from now, I don't think that's the right fit.
So speaking of that, we'll get into Kyler Murray a little bit later in the show. I also want to ask Courtney how much Sheldon Richardson would be worth to the Vikings. But next, if you watched any of the Alliance of American Football, which apparently over 3 million people did.
It did better than the Saturday night NBA game.
It did.
Regular season. I don't know who's watching regular season on a Saturday night.
So a lot of people watched the AAF, the Alliance of American Football. So we're going to talk with ESPN's Mike Rothstein next. He was covering a game. Where was he? In Florida?
Yes, he was in Orlando.
Okay, so he was in Orlando covering a game on Saturday or Sunday. Saturday?
This is over the weekend.
Details. So
you can't even find a replay of the AAF. I'm livid right now.
I know. You want to grind the tape. So
I've got priorities, but
DVR. You should have DVR'd it, and then you could slow it down. Get a little clicker thing. Start circling guys, get your little drawer do. Okay, so we're going to talk with Mike Rothstein next about his impressions covering the Alliance of American Football and whether a spring league can work. We'll do that next here. You are listening to Purple Daily on SKOR North.
Oh, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary, happy anniversary.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla of The Adam Carolla Show. And guess what? We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary. My God. Podcast, or as my dad would call it, a podcast, around for 10 years. And you can hear us at Podcast One or any place you enjoy your podcast. Thanks in advance.
Touchdown! The first in franchise history for the Birmingham Iron, and it's Richardson, the former Alabama great.
Hey, our defense did about all of it the second half, but we played pretty well. I think we only had to punt a couple times, but our defense really was super the second half.
The AAF. Courtney and I both spent some time over the weekend watching the Alliance of American Football, and joining us because somehow he got this assignment to cover the AAF over the weekend, Michael Rothstein. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing pretty well. It's funny, every time I do a radio appearance, the way that I get introduced as covering this league changes. I did one that as I was doing the interview, I went from AAF beat writer to senior writer to, I think if I had done a 20-minute call, I might have become commissioner by the end. I have no idea. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting league. They called me to ask me if I wanted to go down to training camp a few weeks ago. San Antonio is much warmer than the ice storm that is Detroit, so I said, sure. And then they sent me to Florida for the opening game, or one of two opening games, rather. And here I am.
So your normal gig is covering the Detroit Lions. No hosts made any slouching jokes, or?
No host has made any slouching jokes about the AAF. However, it seems to be a staple whenever I come on to talk about the Lions.
Okay, good. So this league, its ratings were no slouch. Right? Huh? Anybody?
Okay, we need to move on. He's never coming back on here. I'm sorry, Mike.
Yeah, I apologize, Michael. Let's try restarting this. Welcome in Michael Rothstein, who over the weekend was asked to cover the Alliance of American Football. Well, tell me a little bit about what your experience was, because Courtney and I both watched, and it looked like the quarterback play was a little shaky. Receivers kept getting hit in the face mask. But overall, I liked the idea of having players who are battling on the cusp of the NFL, putting something new on tape and giving us a little bit of entertainment while they do it.
Yeah, and that's the point of the league, and that's what Bill Polian was trying to do. Bill Polian and Charlie Ebersol, they're the co-founders of the league. They have made no illusions that they want to compete with the NFL. They want to, in their words, and various times when I talked to them while I was in San Antonio, augment the NFL, be complementary to the NFL, and basically do what they're doing, which is take guys that were on practice squads, that were part of final cutdowns, that in the case of Denard Robinson and Christian Hackenberg and Trent Richardson and some of the quote-unquote bigger names, Garrett Gilbert, some of the bigger names in the league, have had some NFL experience but are out of the league for one reason or another, and give them a shot to say, hey, I can get back here, I can play, or in some cases, give guys closure on the football part of their lives, because, and Courtney knows this from covering the NFL as well, one of the most common phrases around the league and around players I talk to is that football retires you. The NFL retires you. Very rare is the player that gets to go out on their own terms. So for some of these guys, especially I think some of the older players who've been out of the league for a year or two, if they can get back to the NFL, great. If they can play in this and kind of end that chapter of their life on their own terms in a 10-game season, or play in the league for 2 years, make $100,000, I think for 2 years it would be $150,000 or $155,000, and walk away at that point and say, okay, at least I walked away on my own terms. That's a huge thing for somebody when they're kind of moving to the next phase of their life. And I think that that's a secondary thing. But the primary thing is to develop players for the league, develop coaches for the league, officials, replay officials, even PR people. Every person I talked to while I was in San Antonio, with the exception of one or two, and most of them, and those one or two were older coaches and one player who actually got cut, was this: I want to get back to the NFL, or I want to get to the NFL. This is the way I see I can get there.
That's what I want to get to, where this is essentially, I mean, the NFL has not tried itself until now. I mean, we've seen other quote unquote farm systems, and I mean, the NFL's got the greatest farm system of any sport. It's college football. But if they're using the AAF to try to, this is where they can kind of, I guess, just mitigate problems and figure things out. The one thing, your game that you were at between Atlanta and Orlando, they had the female, she was an official up in the booth. She changed her mind throughout the process, and being able to kind of see all of that and how that worked and that level of transparency. What do you think that's going to do for the NFL? Because I think it was it was an Orlando challenge there in the second quarter, and they overturned the call. It was ruled an incomplete pass, and I believe that was ruled to a touchdown. Was it not?
Wow. Yeah, I think it was. I say wow because you
level
remember
of minutia
that way better than I do. Yeah, it was. That was one of the things that to me stood out. And listen, you go back and look at the XFL, which Charlie Ebersol's dad was a big part of, and a lot of the technological things that we see now in the NFL that are commonplace started in the XFL. So if this league falls on its face, and listen, at this point, anyone who says that this league is going to be a success or this league's going to be a failure has no idea, because it's 1 week. I think the ratings were very good, but a lot of that was probably curiosity of, well, what is this thing? The big thing is going to be retention, as whether this thing succeeds or fails. That said, the best thing that could happen, or the low bar for what could happen here, is the league doesn't work, but the NFL does what it did with the XFL, does what it's done with other things that have happened in leagues like the USFL, the World League of American Football, even NFL Europe, and take interesting things from it and incorporate it into their own league. And I think that you could very well see that. To me, the biggest thing, the replay official, actually, with the transparency and the officials with the transparency, was very, very good. I saw more of that when I actually watched one of the games on Sunday than covering this game live on Saturday. But to me, the biggest thing was the kickoff and the lack of it. Courtney, you obviously cover the Vikings. You're there all the time. For me, the first quarter, not having the kickoff, not having the extra point, was jarring. By the end of the game, I kind of forgot it existed. And to me, if nothing else comes of this except saying, hey, maybe the kickoff, which is considered the most dangerous play in football, ends up going away, and that ends up being the big legacy of this league, despite whatever else happens, I think that's a strong legacy. And again, I want to get back to the point of saying anyone who thinks that they know if this league is going to succeed or fail at this point just doesn't know what they're talking about, because there's no way to know unless they have a DeLorean. Basically, that's to me is the biggest thing is the technological aspect of it, the replay official, and the no kickoff.
Well, last year the competition committee brought that up. It's like, should they eliminate the kickoff? I feel like that comes up every single year. Do you think it's such a small sample size, but in talking with people as they've been building this league and forming this, that's the mindset that the NFL wants to see? Okay, how are games handled without the kickoff? Is that the direction you think this is going, where they've got something in their mind about it already?
I don't know if the NFL has anything to do with that. When I sat down and talked to Polian in San Antonio, he told me that one of the first things he told Charlie Ebersol was, if I'm going to be involved with this, got to get rid of the kickoff. And that was one of the first things that he said that he wanted to see happen because of the stats that are there. It's a very dangerous play. Very rarely is a play of massive consequence. 10, 12 times a year, there's a kick return for a touchdown. Sometimes, obviously, there are big returns that can change momentum, but, more often than not, it's a touchback and you're getting the ball at the 25-yard line anyway. And if a guy gets blocked poorly, that could lead to an injury. So I don't know how much the NFL had to say in that. Mm-hmm. I know that Polian had told me that they are open to talking with the NFL about anything and everything when it comes to some of this stuff, be it want to experiment with rules changes, want to experiment with different things. They're open to having those conversations. But as of a couple of weeks ago, at least, those conversations, to my knowledge, had not happened, or at least are not being publicly acknowledged that they happened, because we never know what happens behind closed doors. So I think that down the road, if the NFL sees that this league is going to be sustainable and a success, I think that then you could see maybe they try to have some things experimented or change within the AAF or the Alliance, as they prefer to be called, and then see if it makes it to the NFL. From there, probably similar to what we see sometimes in the preseason, where they experiment with stuff then, like they did with the longer extra point a few years ago, and then ended up implementing it.
We are talking with Michael Rothstein. He works for ESPN, normally for NFL Nation as the Detroit Lions reporter, but was covering the Alliance of American Football over the weekend. By the way, Michael, 5 touchdowns last year for on kickoff. So very, very few plays of major consequence.
There you go.
Yeah, but talk to a special teams coach is going to tell you they want to get rid of that. That's not happening.
Keep their job.
Absolutely. And kickers and punters, when I've asked them about that's a big thing. They don't want to lose the kickoff, because that's a large portion of their job that goes away. And frankly, I think at that point, that's when, if there's no kickoff, if there's no extra point, that's when maybe you start seeing more kicker punter combinations if they can find a guy that can do both. And then that eliminates those types of jobs. And one interesting thing here, which doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think it's why they're able to kind of go on the fly and experiment with some stuff and try some different things, is the way that the organization itself is structured. It's a single entity organization, which means every one of these players is an employee of the Alliance of American Football or their parent companies, of the names of their parent companies. Where the NFL, that's different. Every club has their own contracts and all of that, where this is different. All 8 clubs are owned by the league, so they can kind of do a little bit more, and there's no union, at least at this point, to really kind of step in and say, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, because of CBAs and things like that. So it's a completely different structure as well than the NFL, which is why I think they can maybe try things on the fly and be more experimental with stuff without having much pushback.
Michael, let me, before we let you go, ask you one question about the Detroit Lions. Matt Patricia already on the hot seat for next year? I mean, what do you see as the sense for him? We made fun of him a lot in our media room just for the slouching thing and just seeming like the wheels were coming off in year one. But is your feeling that he has to step it up in the NFC North this year, or it's going to be another change in Detroit?
It's tough to say at this point because his contract, general manager Bob Quinn's contract, and quarterback Matthew Stafford's contract are all tied through 2022. They all have the same end date on their contracts. So I think that the Lions are really going to allow this to kind of be seen through and see their plan through. But, and I say but, if things don't get better in 2019, then yeah, I think there's a chance everybody's on the hot seat there. And that's the quarterback, the general manager, and the head coach, because Matt Patricia and Bob Quinn are very much tied together. And at least as of now, Matthew Stafford is tied to both of them because of the contract that he signed that Kirk Cousins then topped. All of that said, if they show progress in 2019, then I think that you see that all three of them return, or at least two of the three, at least the GM and the coach, return in 2020. And then kind of it depends how Matthew Stafford plays in 2019, because really 2020, or the kind of start of the 2020 league year, is the first time where it will be palatable from a financial perspective to even consider moving him. There's a lot of talk about him maybe getting traded this offseason. The amount of money that they would lose in that situation on a cap hit would basically render them struggling to compete in the 2019 season, and I just can't see that happen. So I think the earliest that you could see that move is 2020, and then if Matthew Stafford plays poorly again next year, there's a chance that this past season was an aberration, as everybody was kind of getting used to what Matt Patricia wants. They get rid of Jim Bob Cooter, they hire Darrell Bevell, who obviously people in Minnesota are familiar with. Darrell Bevell will run an offense that Matt Patricia likes. Ball control, run the ball. Give Matthew Stafford what he can do, but maybe don't, even though Darrell Bevell said on Monday night that he wants to maybe stretch him a little bit and stretch the capabilities of what he can do. I think you're going to see a very ball control offense, because that's what Matt Patricia wants, and Darrell Bevell can run that. So as long as those things are married together, I think that they have a chance to improve. But if that doesn't work, then who knows? That's a long-winded answer to your question of saying, no, I don't believe he's on the hot seat. I believe his seat is a little bit warm, but nowhere near the type of situation that, say, Jim Caldwell was in going into the 2017 season, where it was like, if you don't make the playoffs, you're probably losing your job.
Are you guys having the Kyler Murray conversation over there, Michael? I don't mean in Orlando. I mean in Detroit.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I think that from a baseball perspective, there are some people that are in Orlando that would love to be having that conversation, but I don't know where the A's actually are having training camp. But
it's in Arizona.
No, okay, well then
it's a good try.
No one in Orlando is talking about that. That said, no, I don't think they will. Listen, is it Bob Quinn said last night that they're open to taking a quarterback at number 8. Well, sure. Right now, in February, before the combine, they're going to be open to anything. But I can't see them taking a quarterback at number 8 unless they fall in love with one of these top 2 guys, which would be Kyler Murray or Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State. the one caveat with that is that Darrell Bevell was the guy that really went to bat for Russell Wilson and turned Russell Wilson into Russell Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll see a lot of comparables that Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray had. They're both on the shorter side. They're both mobile. They both had potential baseball careers at one point. So there are some comparisons that can be there, but I just don't think that they would make that move at 8 because they have too many defensive needs. And that's why Darrell Bevell is now the offensive coordinator, and that is why we just had that last question about whether Matt Patricia's on the hot seat. They have too many needs and too many holes to fill, starting with tight end, pass rusher, cornerback, wide receiver, that you have your quarterback, and I can't see them really making a move at 8 for this point for Kyler Murray. But I think like every other team in the league, they are going to look at him because they're either going to potentially try to draft him or play against him.
ESPN NFL Nation reporter Michael Rothstein. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Rothstein. I'm glad you got a little Orlando vacation and do some work down there, Mike, and we'll talk to you again in the offseason. We'll get the full free agency Detroit Lions perspective in a couple weeks.
Oh,
here.
I can't wait for that. I'm jacked for that. I know you are too.
Thanks for coming on, Mike.
Hey, sounds great. Talk to you guys in a few weeks.
There you go. Mike Rothstein there from ESPN. If I were them, I'd be having the Kyler Murray conversation like we're going to have when we come back.
True.
Tease for next segment. All right, we'll be back. It's Purple Daily here on SKOR North on 1500.
Binge listen Minnesota sports. SKORNorth.com.